My name is Paul Funk, and I'm an American soldier and proud to be the 17th Commanding General of the United States Army's Training and Doctrine Command.
Team, hello. I'm Command Sergeant Major Hendricks, the 16th Command Sergeant Major of the United States Army's Training and Doctrine Command. Today, we want to emphasize to you the importance of military history, how we continue to learn from it, and how this knowledge helps us adapt our doctrine today.
As soldiers, we all embody the Army values that have been passed along through every generation of brave men and women who have defended our American liberty for almost 250 years. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage.
Now, this video series will introduce you to some of the most significant battles in Army history and showcase our young men and women just like ourselves who displayed our Army values in times of peril.
America's sons and daughters join our Army because they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to serve a greater good. This same sentiment motivated the Minutemen at Bunker Hill, inspired the infantry holding the line at the Marne, and drove the Big Red One troopers onto the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. And that same sentiment is the very reason many of you raised your own right hands. Make no mistake about it. We are the United States Army. We do hard things.
And as a former dog-faced soldier, these hero stories reinforce the concept that understanding our past helps all of us, from every private and lieutenant to every command sergeant major and general. History gives us a way of looking at how other people have accomplished their missions and helps us make more informed and better decisions today.
As you begin your journey in what we know will be a rewarding career, we encourage you to continue to learn about your Army's history and heritage. Because, as President Teddy Roosevelt once said, the more you know about the past, the better prepared you are for the future. By learning our history, we will make our Army better for generations to come, and we will be prepared to win when called to serve on the front lines of freedom. Because never forget, winning matters.
We're thrilled that you've taken this first step to join the finest fighting force on earth, and we really look forward to serving with you as you strive to leave our Jersey in a better place every day as we continue to write our Army's history.
Victory starts here.
Throughout the proud history of the United States Army, young men and women have demonstrated their warrior ethos in peace and war. Guided by the Army core values, their achievements have improved our communities, strengthened our nation, and defended freedom at home and around the world. This is U.S. Army History and Heritage.
Welcome to Army History and Heritage. I'm Specialist Maya Rodriguez.
And I'm Corporal Teresa Isaac. We're here to share some exciting moments from Army history that have made a significant impact on our nation.
Today we are looking back in Army history to the Battle of Yorktown in October 1781.
This was the last major battle in the Revolutionary War, where after 6 years of fighting, the British Army under General Cornwallis surrendered to General George Washington's main Continental Army.
The war between the 13 American colonies and the British Empire lasted from 1775 to 1783. It started in New England and reached a military stalemate in the nearby Middle Colonies in 1778. The British shifted their main war effort in 1779 to the 4 southern and Chesapeake colonies. But as with earlier fighting, the British failed to decisively defeat the Americans. Finally, in the spring of 1781, British forces under Lieutenant General Charles Lord Cornwallis concentrated in Virginia. Eventually, they arrived at the coastal port of Yorktown, Virginia, to establish a base for winter quarters. Over the next 2 months, American forces under General George Washington and their French Army and Navy allies also concentrated in Virginia and seized control of the Chesapeake Bay. With a combined force of 16,000 American and French troops, Washington surrounded Cornwallis's 8,000 troops in Yorktown. Now lacking both reinforcement and resupply or possible evacuation, Cornwallis's forces dug defensive trenches around Yorktown. Meanwhile, Washington troops entrenched opposite the British to conduct a siege.
Here we are at the Yorktown battlefield in Virginia. There's no better way to understand what the soldiers experienced than to be here in person.
This is where the Siege of Yorktown took place. Sieges could last weeks or even months. You can see here how they were conducted. The attacking armies would dig many long lines of trenches and place artillery batteries hundreds of yards from enemy defenses.
Just look across the field. You can see where the British were set up in defense. During this siege, the American and French forces would dig trenches closer and closer to the defenders and pound the defenders into surrendering.
The actual siege began on September 29th and ended on October 19th, 1781. The American and French heavy artillery opened fire on the British that night, shooting over 15,000 cannonballs into the British defenders and into Yorktown itself, thoroughly wrecking the village.
We're going to take it a step further and show you what the soldiers were wearing and carrying.
This is Sergeant Jared Taylor. He is 5'7" and 140 pounds, the average size of Continental soldier.
Huzzah!
Ah yes, huzzah! That was the hua of the Continental soldier. Tell us about your uniform.
Well, my uniform's hot and heavy and wasn't intended for long military campaigns. The tricorn hat is worn at a slight angle so you don't knock it off your head with the musket.
Wow, that's really cool. What about the weapon you're carrying?
This is one of 3 standard flintlocks used by the Continental Army. It weighs about 10 pounds and in the hand of a well-trained soldier can shoot 2 to 3 rounds a minute. I can shoot 5. My other equipment includes my cartridge box, haversack, canteen, and of course, the bayonet.
Awesome. That pretty much covers all the basic needs. Anything else to add?
Huzzah!
I should have seen that coming. You can find more authentic equipment like this at one of our Army museums.
The Army Museum Enterprise has museums at 26 active duty locations and another 48 National Guard museums in the United States, Korea, and Germany, with over 580,000 artifacts in the entire collection. This French-made Charleville flintlock musket is one of 3 types of muskets the Continental soldiers used. This was their preferred musket. For those using an American-made flintlock, the long rifle, soldiers carried powder horns like this scrimshaw decorated one here that kept their gunpowder dry. You would also find many soldiers carrying this book, Baron von Steuben's Manual and Regulation. Von Steuben trained the American soldiers while at Valley Forge, transitioning from many different styles of combat to the European linear style of combat that became the foundation of the Continental Army's doctrine. For the British, the artifact collection includes this cartridge box and contained 24 paper cartridges with pre-packaged powder and soft lead musket ball. This bayonet, made for the British Brown Bess musket, was an essential tool in 18th century warfare, as we will see at Yorktown, where the tactics required an infantry charge employing cold steel on the enemy. This musket was the principal British firearm in the 18th century and was nicknamed the Brown Bess. This 8-inch smoothbore artillery howitzer is similar to the types that the British used throughout the war and during the siege here at Yorktown.
When you can see these artifacts in person, it helps to better understand how and why the soldiers fought the way that they did in their specific time periods.
Huzzah!
Now, let's compare the Continental soldier to the modern soldier. This is Staff Sergeant Eric Feldra. He is 170 pounds and 5'10", the average size of a soldier today. Tell us what you're wearing.
Hua. The uniform is the ACU, the Army Combat Uniform. The M4 rifle weighs about 6.5 pounds, fires up to 950 rounds per minute with an effective range of 600 meters, 700 if you're me. With Kevlar helmet, body armor, protective mask, and ammunition, the uniform weighs about 75 pounds.
Wow, how does it all feel?
Heavy at first, but keep up your physical readiness training and you quickly get used to it. It has everything I need for me to do my job and protect me.
Awesome. Anything else you'd like to add?
Hua!
On the night of October 14th at 7 p.m., under the cover of darkness and fog, were over 400 American and 400 French troops that were about to assault the 2 British earthen fortifications called redoubts. You can still see them there. They're still here.
The young French aristocrat, Marquis de Lafayette, served as a volunteer major general in the Continental Army, and at the young age of 24 years old was in overall command of the American forces that night. Leading his troops in close combat was Alexander Hamilton. You may recognize his name from a recent Broadway musical called, of all things, Hamilton. He personally led his troops in the assault that night.
Leading one of Hamilton's assault companies was Captain Stephen Olney with the Rhode Island Regiment, who had served since the war began in 1775. The front of the American column was a group of sappers and miners, the combat engineers of that period. Their job was to use axes to clear a path through the lines of wooden obstructions to prevent the British position.
Among these elite sappers and miners was young Sergeant Joseph Plum Martin, who had first served during the war in a state militia unit similar to today's National Guard at the young age of 15 years old. So he's a combat-hardened veteran at the young age of 21 years old during this battle.
It's inspiring to know how young the soldiers were back then.
To begin the attack, the American and French assault troops, as quietly as possible, started toward their objectives a few hundred yards away over open ground in front of us.
To prevent an accidental firing of their weapons, which would give away the element of surprise, the soldiers advanced with their muskets, unloaded, with only their bayonets attached to fight the enemy face to face. Let's go check it out.
The soldiers made their way here as the sappers began to clear the wooden obstructions. That's when they came under severe musket fire by the British. They recovered quickly and soon made their way through the ditch, over the parapet, and into the British redoubt. This is where Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Hamilton, Captain Olney, and Sergeant Martin displayed such Army values as duty, selfless service, and personal courage.
It took no more than 10 minutes from their time that they left their starting point to when the Americans overran and captured this British earthwork. Listen to how they fought the battle with their own words as recorded in their letters and diaries.
When we came near the front of the abattis, the enemy fired a full body of musketry. At this, our men broke silence and huzzaed. As order for silence seemed broken by everyone, I huzzaed with all my power, saying, "See how frightened they are? They keep firing into the air."
Just as we arrived at the abattis, the enemy discovered us and directly opened a sharp fire upon us. As soon as the firing began, our people began to cry, "The fort's our own!" The sappers and miners soon cleared a passage for the infantry, who entered it rapidly. I could not pass at the entrance we had made. It was so overcrowded. I therefore forced a passage at a place where I saw the artillery had cut away some abattis. Several others entered at the same time. As I mounted the breastwork, I met an old associate hitching himself down into the trench. I recognized him by the light of the enemy musketry. It was so vivid.
I ran to the right to look for a place to crawl through and entered the ditch. And when I found my men to the number of 10 or 12 had arrived, I stepped onto the parapet and called out, saying in a tone as if there was no danger, "Captain Olney's company, form here!" On this, I had no less than 6 or 8 bayonets push at me. I parried as well as I could with my espantoon, but their blades slid along my handle and scaled my fingers. One bayonet pierced my thigh, another my abdomen. I made a thrust with the remains of my espantoon. At this instant, 2 of my men came up and fired upon the enemy, who part ran away, and some surrendered, so that we entered the redoubt without further opposition.
The rapidity and immediate success of the assault are the best comment on the behavior of troops. They advanced with a passion and resolution superior to every obstacle. I assure you, there was not an officer nor soldier whose behavior would not have a claim to the warmest praise.
Can you imagine the courage and selflessness of these young soldiers in this battle? This is part of Army heritage and that all of us today are inspired by and try to live up to in our Army values.
The French also captured their objective at Redoubt 9. Hamilton and Martin were unhurt in the assault, but Captain Olney suffered 3 bayonet wounds, but he recovered and returned to duty in about 3 weeks. With these critical British redoubts now in American and French hands, the combined forces extended their trenches closer to the British line and put Cornwallis's British Army in a very perilous position.
Over the next 5 days, the combined American and French units forced Cornwallis's surrender. On 19 October 1781, during a lengthy and formal surrender process on this very field where we are now, Cornwallis's forces laid down their arms and became prisoners of General Washington's American and French Allied force.
Diplomatic negotiations soon began that took until September 1783, 2 more years, to end with the Treaty of Paris that recognized the United States as an independent and sovereign nation.
Huzzah!
Huzzah indeed. General George Washington would later become our first American president. Alexander Hamilton served as Washington's first Secretary of the Treasury. Over the decades to come, both Stephen Olney and Joseph Martin continued their service to the country as state and local elected officials.
The Siege of Yorktown and the American soldiers who served there helped to produce the first generation of American servant leaders drawn from the ranks of the Continental Army. Today's United States Army, driven by the Army Corps values, owes its proud history and heritage to the generations of men and women who have served since the Revolutionary War.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Army History and Heritage. For more information about Army history, visit an Army museum or explore Army history online at history.army.mil.
Huzzah!